Don't we miss those days?
Yeah. It was like sunny days. Like I can do this. I want to interrupt you. The biggest fail on I don't know mistake during like your marketing career. Hello. This is new episode of Humans in Growth podcast. I'm Bogdan, and today I'm with Enrique. Hello, Enrique.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start like from you. Who are you and what you do? Why you're here?
It's an interesting question. So I'm Enrique. I'm a Colombian living in Canada. And as it starts to get cold every winter, I start regretting moving to Canada. I'm also a dad. I have now a 1-year-old little beautiful daughter who has changed our lives completely. And then I just recently became the CMO for Pexels as an evolution for my role. And for those who probably don't know what Pexels is, maybe I can give a quick intro to it. But Pexels is pretty much one of the largest photo and video libraries and communities on the internet. So we have millions of people around the world who rely on the content that our contributors upload to Pexels to bring their own stories and projects and ideas to life. That's anything from designers to marketers, all the way to like teachers and non-for-profits rely on the content that is uploaded by our community of contributors for it to be fresh, authentic, diverse, and really localized content that they can use and feel um, part of as well. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I bet Pexels are not your first job. Like, could you tell how did you start your career? Like, why marketing? Or like, how did you start?
I've always been somewhat of an entrepreneurial person in university. I had a couple of businesses with some friends, like nothing huge, but always looking to like grow things. In marketing was the part of business that excited me the most. And when I graduated university, I went into the advertising world and I started at an ad agency, a very local and small, like boutique creative agency here. And I started in the media department. And obviously, like you come out of university, you don't know really much about anything. And I started learning how to do like anything media related, like so ads, like online ads, and mainly like Facebook, because it was what was working at the time, over the most anyway. And I quickly became pretty good at it. And I think that that's kind of where I kind of started learning out of frustrations, because when you become good at something, especially for example ads, you bring people to the website or you generate leads or blah blah blah, but like then you look forward to like what's the return for the company or for the client, and then you see that whatever you brought to the site, like oh, like it wasn't converting, or then like it didn't like turn into revenue, it didn't turn into sales. So you're kind of like, oh, like I'm doing all this work to bring people on, but then why is it that it's not working? And I think that that slowly started me help to expand the view of what marketing was. I think that we all kind of start. I mean, not everyone, especially the audience on the podcast, but like if you talk to anyone around, like what's marketing? It's advertising, because advertising used to be all the marketing
Yeah,
was, right? But like now it has expanded to so much um, that slowly kind of I learned that. So I had the advantage of starting from one piece and becoming very learning very deep into that, like the T-shaped marketing type of thing that you kind of hear. I went very deep into advertising and learning that, but then understanding that like it's not necessarily what works the full way. Like you still need to do other things to make it work. So I kind of slowly moved piece by piece of the journey, and like kind of moved into like conversion rate optimization and web analytics to really start learning, okay, like I'm driving all these people to the website. How can I make this work for them? Like whatever we wanted them to do in the website, like whatever the conversion was, like what can we make it happen for them to become clients or leads? And then again, like the frustration came when like, oh, you have leads, but then like nothing is converting from those. So you then start like, okay, like what's the next phase on it? Like, is it email? Is it like sales enablement? What are the different things that you can do as a marketer to like continue the journey for the people that you're trying to move towards the conversion? And I think that that's kind of where like I started learning a lot about like the basics of marketing, not just this what you need to do, like how to explain this, like for example, like at the time where I started this, like in advertising, it was the time that Facebook, for example, was all about really being a good media buyer. You just really needed to do a lot of tests, like create multiple audiences, like different interests. Like it was all about how good you were at tricking the algorithm to make sure that you reach the right people. But once that gets like saturated, it becomes back to the basics of what marketing really is. And like how do you connect a problem that you're solving to the problem that the person has and building that out. So I think that was the foundation for me in terms of marketing. I jumped through a couple agencies doing this, and I think that my biggest frustration was that at an agency you don't really end up owning the full funnel or the cycle of a customer. The hire agency for ads, that's all you're doing. You don't do their email. You don't do like the sales enablement. You don't do like a lot of those pieces. So that's kind of when I started looking into the startup world and seeing like how can I go to the client side and really prove that I can do this better. And I mean it was a wake up call too. Like I ended up joining a startup that had a really good idea, but it was kind of at the end of like the burn rate. Like they had already invested a lot of cash. They hired me with like kind of like as a last resort of being like, hey, like we need to make this work. We need someone to help us with growth. So it was a huge crash course for me to like jump into like product. And again, like how does marketing start combining with like product? Because like once it goes into the product, it's not just the product ownership of like how do you deliver value, but it's also marketing and how do you do those things combined. So I went deep into that, but at the same time, the founder kind of was relying a lot on me. So we were working to very closely together on raising more capital, on managing the board. So 10 months of like a crash course on entrepreneurship that ended up burning me out. And by the end of it, I mean, I learned a lot. I enjoyed the time that I had there. I have nothing to complain on that side, but I just knew that I needed something that it wasn't failing. And then you kind of had all the responsibility on your shoulders. But maybe how do you join something where like there is momentum and you can really use growth in the processes that you kind of know to add gasoline to the fire, to like make it bigger, like not necessarily like go from zero. That's how I ended up finding Pexels. I kind of was interviewing for a couple, like not even interviewing, just having conversations with different startups, different founders. And I chatted at the time with the head of community at Pexels. And I mean, Pexels has always been very community driven. There was no marketing team, it was only community team. So she kind of wanted to have someone on her side that could help her with the marketing side and grow from that piece. And for me, the piece that I think convinced me to join them was two. One, I love photography and enjoy that as a hobby. Like I'm not a professional. I don't want to like pull here that I'm really good at it, but I enjoy it. It's kind of a hobby. And then the second piece, it was the mission behind it. Because when you think about imagery and you take a little bit of a step back, it has a huge impact on what we see as people and as culture. When you're going down the road or like you see ads, like you're seeing different visuals, different people, and whatever gets normalized is what you think the world really is. And being one of the biggest sources of free resources on imagery, like we know that we have a responsibility to make sure that it's not just what people want to download, but like it's also like there's diversity, there's localization. If you're in Turkey, like and you search for coffee, it shouldn't just be like an American girl drinking Starbucks. Like their coffee is very specific, right? So like how do we make sure that like different places feel like they have like representation on them and then they can use it to like for their own brands and projects. So that's the piece that convinced me to join because I think one of the hardest things to do in marketing is brand. And when there's no story behind it, it's really hard to like develop a brand. So that convinced me, and then kind of the role has been evolving to. Well, I mean, in the past week, I kind of became the CMO. Kind of been doing the job for a couple months now, I would say. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much the story and how I think little pieces of the journey kind of taught me one brought me to where I am, but also taught me the structure and mental like frameworks that I use for marketing and how I understand marketing.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations that you become CMO. Yeah, I know that's a great
Thank you.
position. Yes, congratulations. And like your story is interesting, and I don't know, I have some feelings that I also have similar challenges and pains and problems in different like part of my career, because I know this feeling like when you started like from acquisition side and you just also think that okay, marketing it's like equal to acquisition, that's all, and then you figure out okay, it's not so easy. It's not only about acquisition. And I also remember the time when it was like much easier to buy ads and have profit, like in Facebook.
Don't we miss those days?
Yeah. It was like sunny days, like from the past, and that's great. And also, I'm curious, like because you work as Pexels. Sorry for my pronunciation. Yeah,
Pexels, yeah.
Pexels. Yeah, and I also know that like obviously you're not the single like player on market, like photo banks or like tools, communities for photographers. How do you differentiate yourself in this crowded field, story, community, some kind of other things? Because like there are, as I'm not a photographer, I'm only just know big companies like Shutterstock, Unsplash, and kind of in different others. Could you tell me the difference, how you like differentiate yourself on this market?
Yeah, I mean, so it's an interesting challenge too, because at the end of the day, like we're a marketplace. So we have the community of photographers, the people who come and upload the photos for free, which is probably the hardest piece of the puzzle. And then we have the people who come and download the photos, which not to say that it's the easier part, but like if you tell a marketer or any like a designer, hey, here's an amazing free photo or video you can use, like it's very easy to them to say yes. But then how do you connect with a photographer who, like for them, their photography is really related to them. Like it's very personal. So how do you tell someone, hey, like come and give your photos and your art for free? Like that's the hardest piece that we kind of live with as a challenge. And I think it's all about understanding what value people get. A lot of the big contributors that we have on Pexels, they're not doing it because they want to make money, but that they really align with the vision that we have of how do we enable a lot of people around the world to be creative, and how do we do that in a way that everyone can feel identified, whether you're kind of what I'm saying, whether you're in Colombia, whether you're in Turkey, that you see people who look like you, that you see people look like your kids and they can see themselves reflected into that. So like a lot of people really do buy into that mission of how do we do that. And also for them is the excitement of being seen and appreciated, because sometimes like really cool things happen to contributors where like, I mean, one of them for example is just featured on a Netflix documentary, and it came out of like having his content being seen on Pexels. And it was, I forget the name of the documentary, but it's the one narrated by Barack Obama. Which, you know, like how cool is it that like your videos were like on a Netflix documentary narrated by
Yeah, you
Obama?
can
Like
flex a lot about it. Yeah.
100%. And there's big things like that, but there's other smaller things like that where, like for example, like an independent writer reached out to like a photographer and was like, "Hey, can I use your photo to make like a painting out of it to use for a book that we have?" And like they actually ended up building like a super nice relationship with each other, and like they're friends. Like he sent them the copy of the book. So like there's a lot of those cool things that happen. So for me, how do we differentiate ourselves, which is kind of your question, is one, building the value for them and making the contributors the brand. So it's not about being seen as Pexels, but as the contributors being seen for who they are and what they do. So we really try to enable them to be the center of attention and not Pexels. And I think they really do appreciate that. And then obviously the foundation of all of that is kind of what I've been saying about the vision and the mission, which is like, how do we bring a diverse library of photos and videos that anyone can use around the world? I think that that's what solidifies what we have done. And it's being copied, but I think it's a good thing that it's being copied as a positioning.
Yeah, that's great. As I already understand, Pexels is like marketplace, as you told me, and I know that it's kind of hard to work both on two sides of acquisition, like when you need to, in your case, when you need to acquire photographers, creators, suppliers in this case, and when you also need to like acquire people that will use this photo. Did you separate this marketing, like for creators, for, I don't know, for clients, or I don't know, people that will use this content? Do you have like different teams, different people, or it's all kind of mix, like in Pexels?
We separated in terms of strategy. So we do know that, there's different levers that will help on one side versus the other. And for the high like priority levers, like we do have separate teams and separate people. But for example, like our content team is one content team that will work on both sides of the marketplace. With that being said, like 80% of the time is really focused on the contributors, and potentially 10 to 20 might be on the people who come download. But I think it's all about identifying like the levers of growth. So for example, on the people who come and download the photos, like we have SEO is our biggest lever. Like 70% of our traffic, and we're talking about like more than 30 million sessions per month, comes through search. So even if I do like, we've done campaigns, we've done like different things that have been quite successful at getting PR, at getting like even sessions to the site. But like when you compare that to 30 million sessions that SEO is bringing, it's a drop in the bucket, right? Like we made a content calendar last year that was like a very basic content calendar, like where people could like see like all the like, I mean not all, but like a lot of the special dates around the year, and all of those would have a curated collection of photos and videos that you can use to like you to do that. And this was built on a microsite on like Canva websites, and that drove back to Pexels more than 700,000 sessions. Which, if this would have been like Enrique in like any other of my jobs that I've ever had, that's like holy shit, that's like a lot of people, right? Like it's a huge amount of people. But for like us as a bigger company, like it doesn't even show a spike on traffic. Like it's just there, right? So like um a lot of the focus on that area is SEO, and how do we scale it and improve it. And for that, I mean, I kind of understand SEO. Like I know the basics. I worked on it more on the content side, but I knew that that wasn't something that I was gonna be the lead on it. So like we hired someone who is an expert, and honestly, like probably could be like, I mean, he's an amazing person. Like, and he understands it so well that like he has really been the one that has been driving that by himself. Like I support him, but like all the strategy and all the growth is coming from him. Nothing to do with what I do.
Yeah, and I want to zoom out a bit. And you like at the beginning you told that your or Pexels work with creators and with like I don't know how you call people that use your content but not creators. Um, just
We call them downloaders, but we're
download.
consumers.
Okay. Yes, you told that you have different strategy for acquiring creators and downloaders, but and to be honest, we and also in marketing space and business space, we use a lot of like strategy, marketing strategy, growth strategy. Could you tell me like what do you mean by strategy in your like case when you are CMO of a product? Like what is it? It is like some plan, some document, like could you tell me more?
It's a bit of everything. I mean, it depends on how it lives. I think strategy at the end of the day is simply a plan to accomplish an objective. And that has some guardrails on how you're going to do that. I think that my biggest pet peeve as a marketer is hearing the dilemma between like strategy versus execution. Like it shouldn't exist. Like one without the other is useless. Like
Yeah,
if you're executing without a strategy, you're gonna get somewhere, but you might not get to where you want to be. And if you
yeah,
have the best strategy, but you don't know how to execute, you're also getting absolutely nowhere. Um, but it really is about like understanding. For me, like it's really basic about understanding what the levers of growth are and how you can use them to get there. And it's all about prioritization. Like we could do a million things to drive more traffic to the website. Again, like understanding for like the consumer or downloader side. But I know that like SEO is the most important piece of that. So like why focus more and more resources on something else when I know that SEO is going to be the driver of 70-80% of our traffic, right? Um, on the on the contributor side, which again is probably like the more complex piece of marketing, the interesting piece is that the focus of this is like not just acquisition and how do we get more contributors, because it organically is happening. Like I actually there's like some level of contributors that we get that I cannot attribute to like anything that we're doing. It's just happening. Versus if we look at more like analyzing like what exactly is it that's driving growth in or like that's driving the uploads and the approved uploads on Pexels. And a lot of it is more actually focused on like how do we do a better job at delivering value in the activation phase. So how do we partner with product to do that better and quicker, and then actually in the retention. So like we do a lot of the work on lifecycle marketing right now versus a lot of the acquisition type of marketing. And that all comes from again like understanding what is it that is driving growth, like where is it that the potential, the opportunity is, and then how do you decide to allocate your resources to tackle it. Again, there's 1,000 different things that we could be doing all over the map to be acquire more contributors, to do more things, but like what is it that's going to drive the most bang for your buck because you don't have unlimited resources. And I think that that's what strategy really is. With the guardrail, I think that it's a plan and everything, but I always like to include also there's guardrails within it, like understanding what is it the problem that you're solving for a contributor, what's the value that they see, like what's the key messaging, what's the hook. All of these things should live within a strategy because really that is how you're convincing people. It goes back to like the marketing foundations of like if you don't know what you're like telling people to convince them to do something, you can be the best at SEO, you can be the best at like ads, is not going to move the needle. So I think that adding those guardrails within a strategy is also quite important for the whole team to be able to see that. That lives in so many different places. I've gone from like just 30-page documents which are like useless. I dump my brain into it, but obviously no one else is going to read them. But then you kind of build like potentially like decks that are specific to like, for example, key messaging and what that is, or like when you onboard people that you can share some of these things. But it's always evolving, and you could be planning for a year, but the reality is that like the strategy is going to change in 3 to 6 months easily of what you're allocating resources and what you're doing. Um, yeah, does that kind of answer the question, or am
Yeah,
I going into too many tangents?
yes, thank you. Yeah, and I know this feeling when you like started from like 30 pages document on Notion with all your thoughts, and then you just like figuring out, okay, and nobody will read it. I need to simplify it and just maybe edit a bit. Let's imagine I'm marketer, lead head of marketing or CMO in some company, and I need to work on my strategy. I don't know, have this task from executives or something like that. What you can recommend to me, like books, frameworks, I don't know, some articles, like which help you or you just can recommend just to deep dive in this topic?
Um, I'll recommend my thought process first because I
Okay.
think that it's also potentially important. Not to say that like I'll give you books that I think work in specific pieces, but I think that you kind of have to start with some framework in your mind of how you're going to do this. And I think that like it's different when you're like going to launch a new thing that versus when you have something that already exists. When something that already exists, which is I think that my expertise more is like scaling up than it is starting from scratch. That's where like I kind of like have been working on and do that is really going deep into data to understand the quantitative data that tells you what is happening and mapping out where the drop offs, whether like you call it a funnel, a flywheel, whatever these days people get offended by like whatever you call that, but like it is at the end of the day of a funnel. Like you people who like are interested, like you're generating demand, like capturing demand, leads, whatever you call this. But like there's always like different little pieces that you kind of have to understand. How does that look mathematically in terms of numbers? Where exactly is it that is the biggest drop offs, the biggest opportunities? And that kind of guides you. The second piece of data, which I think everyone skips, is the qualitative side. Like you might understand what is happening. I have a huge drop off here, but if you don't understand why it's happening, you're just making maybe educated assumptions on how to fix it, but really it comes from understanding people and understanding what are the triggers, what are the things, and you're only going to get that from talking to your customers. For that, competing against luck by Christian Christensen. I'm terrible at names, but I mean, this is he's I mean one of the founders of the Job to Be Done theory. I think that that's one of my favorite books to really understand why people do what they do, why people buy what they buy, and what they're trying to solve, and how to put it in a framework that then you can translate it to your own team and say like, hey, here's what they're trying to solve. They're not trying to do this. They're trying to like solve for this specific problem. What's the deeper root that they're trying to really solve for? And that's kind of where I think the foundation again of marketing lies. Obviously, Awesome is also another book on like by April Dunford on positioning that I think helps with that structure of like what's the guardrail of how you're going to acquire, or like not acquire, but what are you going to tell people that you are? What's the hook? What differentiates you from the other people? Why is it that I'm specially good for you, for the type of person that I'm trying to get? And then from there, I think that it's going to like the different parts of marketing and understanding like, for example, for me, like I knew that SEO was the lever, and I'm not the person to hold that or take the torch and win. So like, how do you find someone who can do that? So I think that then it depends on like where the levers are and what you're going to really tackle for them to understand. Like, I mean, a book might help you, but you might also just have to find someone to kind of support you from that. But I'm a huge believer on the foundations of marketing in psychology and humans to really build from there to make it a strategy that is about the consumer adding value to them, solving the problems versus changing a percentage conversion rate
Yeah,
and making it happen, right?
yeah, yeah. And last question about strategy. Like obviously, you can't just prepare a strategy and think that like it will become real and that people or team will use it or align with it. Could you tell me how do you sell or communicate the strategy to people that you work with? I don't know, stakeholders, employees, some kind of different people. Like, how do you do this?
It's funny because marketers are the worst, our internal marketing. Like we're like, oh, this is perfect. Like it's logical, and then we don't communicate it with anyone. And I still literally suffer. I literally just launched a campaign that I have told no one in the company about. And I'm like, how is it that like I preach this and I don't do it? Be the best person to give you the guidance on that one. But honestly, it's all about connecting for me. If you have a group of people in a team that are customer centric and mission driven, it's connecting the what you're doing with the why. And I think that then people buy into it. I mean, it depends on the person. You have to communicate things differently with different people. But like for me, I'm a very logical person where I want to understand why we need to do this. Here's how the thought process was to solve it, and now here's what we're going to be doing to solve that. That's how I tend to explain that. For example, the Pexels, we have weekly team calls where we kind of go through some of these things depending on who's speaking. Not that every call like is a strategy one, but like we present projects of what's happening in different teams. And like the foundation is that like what is this project attached to like company objective? Which company objective is this hitting? Why again are we trying to like hit this objective? What's the insight that drove this project or this like product feature or this like marketing campaign? Like what is it that like we kind of thought about this and why? And that's what get most people to understand and buy into things. But it's a lot of over communicating that I think that we just need to do a better job at. Especially, I mean, specifically me, but I think that marketers in general we're really bad at marketing internally our own stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I know this feeling when you just think, oh, I have like brilliant idea about how to make it real, like how to, I don't know, push product to the market, and then you just forget about to tell about this great idea to your teammates and to people that you work with. You told me like about your previous experience in small startup, and now like seems like you are working in bigger product in larger company. Could you tell me the difference or maybe growth approaches on different scale? Because obviously it's different. Like based on your experience, like what's changed during different stages or scales or sizes of the product company?
It's interesting because like it's also defining what growth is, right? Like in my mind, how I would define growth is I don't want to call maybe not a team, but like yeah, a team of people who like focus on solving one specific thing at a time, using experimentation, rapid learning to then do compound growth. I think a lot of the companies are looking for growth, but I don't think that a lot of companies are ready for growth. When I joined the first startup that I kind of mentioned, like I was hired as like the director of growth. That's what I was supposed to be doing. But when I arrived, that there wasn't processes or systems in place that led for someone to like kind of put a team on top of something else and try to just hyper focus on a North Star metric and experiment like really iterative. I'm terrible at saying that word, but that was actually good. Like doing that very quickly. Instead, like a lot of the focus became on like how do you grow the product or how do you like do the product roadmap, and it becomes more about like the growth of like the roadmap versus actually focusing on changing something. So I think that for me, like what changed here is that one, we have obviously more resources than I had at the previous startup, where we can actually allocate people and allocate engineers, which is every growth leader is like promised that they're going to get engineers and like they're going to get help, and like then they join and it's like, oh, like here's a big project that like can be quite impactful, but we need this many engineers, and they're like, oh, like no, we don't have engineers for that right now, can you focus on something else? And then like it gets trickle and trickle down, and then they become doing like just like some acquisition marketing ads, like whatever, that does not really focus on growth. So yeah, I mean maybe that's more of a rant than an approach, but I think again I go back to foundations in my mind. Yes, it is different how you execute on growth, but I think the foundation should remain the same, is understanding where the growth levers are, finding the deep insight into like what's happening there and why it's happening that, to then figure out ways and experiments to solve that. Is everyone ready to do growth? I don't think so. And especially like not everyone has the data numbers to be able to run growth, right? Like if you don't have, like with Pexels, it's really cool to like do experiments because within a week I have statistical significant results, right? Like we can move faster. But when I was at the other startup, like we might have like a couple thousand people per week, an experiment would take forever. So that you actually have to drop statistical significance and go more in like heuristic and see if you can improve things without like necessarily being like, oh, this is like the confidence of this is like 99% and like whatever p value you want to throw into that.
Yeah, I also often think about like experiments when you have a lot of data, when you don't have a lot of data and or traffic just to experiment. And sometimes I think that it's much simpler to experiment when you have traffic, when you can launch A/B tests and like to get this statistical significance. But I guess not the hardest, but one of the hardest thing is to experiment and to do growth when you don't have a lot of data. Or for example, when you experiment with, I don't know, for example, close to paywalls or some far in the product, when you just by default don't have a lot of traffic just because it's like down the funnel. So how it's possible to experiment when you don't have a lot of traffic, just to make it holistic, just to, I don't know, listen your inner voice, or just to focus on qualitative data? Like what to do?
I mean, your inner voice is good as long as you're very customer centric and also have a lot of like conversations with them. So I'm a believer in qualitative data and analysis. For example, like when you're doing sales enablement, which again like is super close to like that piece where like you can't really test of that. But if you kind of like give it to your sales team and then like there's two different pitches and like you know that one of them is working, like they will tell you like one is working better than the other one. I think those things are valid. And sometimes it's just about doing of that and like more in the heuristic approach of like what really you think it's going to work better based on what you know and just go with it. Then sometimes experimenting things that potentially don't need to be experimented. And like a lot of people also focus on like color experimentation, which is like a waste of time, right? Like
Yeah, like there are a lot of memes about experiments with button color, and then that now, because of firing like people from Twitter, I don't know if joke or not that they had product manager for bookmark button like on the tweet, and okay, it sounds like not the most interesting job to do. Yeah, to be the product manager of the button. Yeah, so that's fine. Okay, let's move from hard skill, strategy, and all the stuff. Let's talk about mentorship and like mentoring people. I know that you have been mentoring for a long time. Could you tell me why do you do this? How it helps you, and like what do you motivate you like to do this? Why?
I think that there's two sides. One, I think that like for me, like the moments that I've grown the most in my career have been because of mentors. And maybe not officially like, hey, you're my mentor, but like people who I worked with who just like really cared about my development and cared about like not just like the job, but like really helping me grow. And really, I think that those people have propelled me to where I am today, to the point where like I think I've skipped years of like growth that I would have had to do, like if you don't have someone helping you through it. Um, so when I see, and maybe this is somewhat like when I see people who really want to grow and who really have that drive and kind of see a little bit of yourself in them, you always want to help them, right? Like you always kind of know that like someone helped me, like I can be that person to them. Um, so yeah, I think that that's one side. The other side is it's been more selfish, and I think that it's also because you learn so much. Like before I started mentoring, like I knew I was good at what I did, but I didn't really know what I did right. When you start mentoring, you kind of have conversations where you have to explain why you did things that before you never had to have. Like you kind of knew, like it's in your mind, but like how do you put frameworks that you have in your mind into words is not easy to do, right? Like I think it takes time to develop. It takes time to like sit down and write them. And having conversations with people of like, oh, you experienced that problem, here's how I solved it. It also helps you in retrospect see what you did right and wrong in certain situations to then develop a framework that you can just use all the time. And instead of having to think, oh, how do I approach this problem? Like you already know exactly what are your steps to like approaching a problem, building a strategy, like going back to that. Like I kind of have it in my mind. So like now I can actually explain it in words and help someone else go through it. So I really enjoy the part of like forcing you to think about what you've done and how do you build the frameworks to be able to explain them to people.
This is great. I also think that's great that you understand your like selfish part of the scene, because I see sometimes that people just only talk about, oh, I want to bring value and I want to do something great. That's okay. But I think that often when people just don't communicate and don't say for yourself what like your own motivation to this, you can just lose interest to the scene or to mentorship or some other kind. And I also think that selfish motivation is that's great, and you always have it, like because you're human and we have selfish
Yeah.
motivation inside us. Yes, so that's okay. Could you tell me how do you like exactly mentor people? Do you like work, I don't know, with marketers, with entrepreneurs? Do you focus on career, on personal part? Like, what do you do? What do you like to do in mentorship? Like, tell me about it.
It depends, I suppose. Like for example, like when you do, I know you're part of Growth Mentor as well. Like when you do those, you kind of get people coming in out of the blue, like to ask questions to solve a specific problem. So depending on that, like you might want to help them solve the problem or you just solve it for them. I always try to be the person who kind of asks the questions that might take them towards the direction where they understand again the process and how to think of that to then be able to answer it themselves. But those become like very like one-off conversations that you help them once, you help them twice, and they don't come back. I think that there's other people who you build relationships, and I think that the ones that work the best are maybe people who are like on sometimes on your same level, where you just have really deep conversations of like progress and deep conversations of where you're at and like the frustrations, the pain points, the good things. And I think that those are probably the best type of mentorship that you have. And not necessarily like I mean the same level and like another marketer who's at the same level, but like a designer or like someone who's like in the same mentality of like they want to grow, they want to keep learning, um, where you align in values. Like I think those conversations in meetups, like I organize those things like once a month with a couple of like my friends or people who I know, like I just want to keep having those conversations. Those are the most valuable, I think, where both people get value because the conversations work the most. And then there's others that like when people just come out of the blue and message you on LinkedIn and they're like, hey, like I just admire what you've done. Like, how did you get there and like have those conversations? Again, I was there. Like I was asking people the same questions. So like I love having those conversations and being able to help someone figure it out and again kind of like put yourself in the shoes of when you were like 10 years ago starting your career. Like what would I do different that like could help someone else accelerate their career and learnings?
This is great. And about mentorship, do you have like mentors or only mentee right now? I'm just curious.
It's an interesting question. I think that I have a couple people who I would say they're mentors to me and I'm mentors to them as well. Like we kind of like have those mutual conversations and we help each other. I am trying to build right now. I mean, I heard this from a CMO in the past. A board of people where like you kind of find mentors where you like, I mean, people who are like having CMOs for years or like having CMOs at big companies and different type of things. Like to learn what I haven't been able to learn. Like that's kind of where like my objective next year is to build a couple of those where I can actually get more than what I'm giving. I suppose again selfish, but that's what I'm trying to like trying to find and how to improve myself a little bit further. But I think that most of the people are relationships that are symbiotic. Is that the right word? Like where you both get value? I think that that's the word. I could be wrong. I'm not a
Yeah,
scientist.
yeah. I also yeah. So no worries. And the question that I have in my mind: how to choose mentor, like at some point of your time, because a lot of like great specialists and that grades like have mentorship or something like that and help other people. What is the best way or the best approach to find mentor for you that can bring you like maximum value? Like, what do you think? How to find the right mentor?
I think people you admire, maybe. I don't know. Honestly, like the best mentors that I've had, luckily, have been my bosses or leaders at companies. So I was lucky that I didn't have to go find them. And I think that also it's better because like you see them like every day, or like have conversations ongoingly, understand your problems much better. I think those have been the best that I've had. I think external mentors I haven't really worked with a lot that I feel like have added. I mean, I don't want to say that they haven't added value, but like to the amount of value that like some of like the people who have been the closest to me, I think that's it's hard. And like I said, maybe like building just relationships with people who are like similar like level to you that like also want to grow is probably some of the best mentorship that you can get. I think is like talking to like a psychologist. You're just saying your feelings and talking, but then you're like, oh, like now this makes sense, and like now you like figure it out. And I think that those are good to have.
Yeah. And also back to our conversation about qualitative data, about customer-centric approach and all the stuff. Obviously, it's like connected to empathy, to communication with your like customers, user, target audience. But I found that it's not so easy for a lot of like people, marketers, product manager, and engineers to do this. I don't know why. Maybe do you have some advices how to, I don't know, improve your empathy level or how to build this habit to communicate with customers and users to get more insights? Because as we already discussed, like often you don't have a lot of data like to run A/B tests and you just need some qualitative data. Do you have some advices how to like focus on or bet on empathy?
I don't know if empathy is something you can teach. I think you either have it or you don't. Again, like I think that the alignment of company mission and serving the people who your company serves is what also brings a lot of the empathy. Like if you're not connected to the people who you're solving problems for, it's hard to be like empathetic about them. But like if you feel somewhat closer to them, it's easier to get there. But I don't think you need empathy to be very honest on a qualitative perspective. Like you can learn from people without feeling too much empathy for them. Like, you know, like the empathy that actually makes you feel something. I think like you just want to understand, like, hey, like, what's your problem? I'm here to solve it. That's my job. Like, you can do that. I think that I get most of that out of like customer interviews and just asking questions about their problems and asking why and how and just like all these like questions that dive deeper into like understanding the really the reasoning behind of the actions that they do. That's what brings the insight out of things. Again, the book that I recommended, Competing Against Luck, it's all about jobs to be done. Like there's some interviewing stuff there. There's also in terms of resources, Caitlin. foregoing. I'm terrible at names and also pronouncing things, but she is a Twitter. I mean, I'm not gonna say influencer, but like she's Twitter personality. She works a lot on building those things and also customer psychology. She has a really cool newsletter about all those things that also is super helpful to learn how to do those better. But it takes practice. Like doing customer interviews is not as easy as having a call with someone. You have to learn how to do them. You have to learn how to stop yourself from speaking and just listening and not give them the answers, not rush it. It's really hard. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes like you have good interviews and sometimes you're like, this is like shitty interview. But I think it's all about learning and just doing it.
Yeah, I so feel it like about interruption because right now, like during our podcast recording, I also wanted to interrupt you because I have some ideas or something to add, but I just stopped myself not to interrupt you. Yeah, so that's
It's
all.
really hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. Yeah, it's really hard because you have something to add. Yeah, and I had funny situation today, not like on interview, but during some call, I also wanted to interrupt person and to add something, but I just had some issues with microphone, so I just wasn't able to do this. And okay, I can do this. I want to interrupt you. I want to add something interesting, but I can do it. Okay, yeah. And as already CMO of like great and big product, could you tell like I talked like with a lot of marketers and like some of them have a goal to become I don't know leader of marketing function in company in some product. For example, to move from a marketing manager, product marketing manager to head of marketing CMO. Like, but what you can recommend, like what like these people should need to focus on maybe on some specific skill sets, on communication, on sales. What you can oh
Here, let me just all good.
yeah.
Let me turn the camera. Oh, there it worked. Here, give me a sec. I'll turn it on and off.
I talk with a lot of marketers, like marketing manager, product marketing manager, like or on similar positions, and I heard a lot that like people have motivation to become lead manager, head of VP, like C level, and to lead, for example, marketing function on growth function. Like, but for sure, you need to focus on some specific skills or on some specific areas because it's not so simple, but as obvious as how to become marketer to I don't know read books, practice, and all this stuff. How do you make this shift from specialist manager to C level to head of? Like, tell me about your experience.
I think the first thing I would say is make sure that's what you want to do because you want to do it, not because that's how you grow in a career. Like I think that a lot of people don't realize, and this was me as well. I think that I just fit the bill for this because like I'm a generalist at heart. Like I like to understand the full picture and I like to build the systems to make it work and not really specialize in something. So I think for me was helpful. But I've seen a lot of people who are really good at what they do. Um, like for example, SEO, you're super SEO specialist, like, and you think that the only way up is to like go broader and like become a CMO or become like the head of marketing or the head of whatever. There's a lot of growth that you can have. There's specialties that make way more money than sometimes a C-suite with. So like, don't do it based on that's the only path that you're going to have. If you really want to do it, I think, I mean, there's a lot of things that get you there. I don't think that I am also like to the point that I said, like, I don't think you ever become like great at everything. One thing that I think it's super helpful is one, understanding the bigger picture of like how is it that what you're doing at this specific moment is adding value to the bigger, like up goal, go up and up and up, and understanding the bigger picture that like when you have conversations with your managers, when you have conversations with the CEO, when you have conversations like you know that what you're doing is like, oh, like I tripled like the leads, but what does that mean? Or I triple traffic into the webs. Like you mean like how does that actually like add value to like the bottom line or what the person above or above them would care? I think understanding that is quite important because the way you communicate success to different people matters. Like someone is not gonna like a CEO might not care about like campaign like all the way at the bottom of like the funnel where like it's super quick or whatever. Like for them, it's just another number. Versus if they understand like the bigger picture of what it has done, like is important to do that. I think it's a lot of soft skills that get you there as well. Communication being one of them, and managing up being a super important piece of that. I think that like a lot of people don't realize how important it is to be managing up and helping your leader through their problems and like saying how what you're doing is solving their problems, instead of always waiting for the person to be like, hey, here's a problem, help me solve it, but like actually like doing kind of the opposite, and being the problem solver for the person who's above you or above. Like I think that that's always what's going to get you places, because it's all about relationships, I think. um to be able to do that, and then leadership is a big piece. I think that like you don't realize how hard it is to be a leader, and getting up there, like a lot of things become your fault, like even if it's not like you're blamed for things that happen, and you have to take it, that is part of the role. You're also going to be disappointing a lot more people. You kind of have to divide your time and your resources, and there's a lot of pressure that comes from that. So again, like make sure that that's what you want to be doing. Like it becomes a lot of managing people than marketing sometimes. Like sometimes is a lot more about like helping someone else be successful and stuff, which is great, but like also it separates a little bit more from like the passion that brought you here. Like, you know what I mean? Like I think we all are like connected by like loving marketing and growth and like getting there. And then sometimes you have to take a step aside, and like it's all about focusing on like developing a team or like helping a person do something different. Um so yeah, there's a lot of different variables. I don't think that I'm there yet as a leader. I know I can improve a lot, but I do get the satisfaction of helping, kind of like the mentorship piece, and helping my team, whether it's to grow within the company or outside of Pexels, and if they need to move to make that career growth, I'm there to help them do that. Um, but yeah, it's I don't know if that answered your question, or if I went into like I go into like so many tangents and so many ways of answering a question, but I hopefully.
Yeah, and I also I'm totally agree with you about like the first question you need to ask yourself, like, is it like really what you want? Because I remember my first years like in marketing, and I don't know why. Okay, I know why, just because of some childhood trauma. Yeah, but I had idea to be the best marketer, and I remember this because I worked on this desire or goal with my therapist, and what we found together with my therapist is like there are no like rating or award like where like people choose the best marketer or something like that, and so it's a goal that you can't reach for sure. Yeah. So yeah, I just asked myself, do I really need it? Yeah, and I found that I don't need it. Finally, you're back and your video is back. I think I have the last question. As a human, like as a marketer, during like your work with different companies, different products, um, do you like which fails do you remember? Which like I don't know. What do you have in mind when I just ask you what was the biggest fail on I don't know mistake during like your marketing career or just some things in marketing?
I think that the previous startup, like I really thought that like I don't know if it's like a hero complex, but like I thought that I was gonna get there and be able to like take it out of like the path that it was, and we did good. Like I mean, we grew like we grew revenue like 5 to 10 times, like which is pretty good, but like it wasn't enough to get new investors or to like get the investors that already had put money into to reinvest. Um, so I think that for me was just like a wake up call. Like sometimes you can't do it all. Like you might think you know a lot of things, and you might actually know them, but like it doesn't mean that it's easy to do it. Even if you have the framework, the strategy, whatever you think, like nothing's ever going to work like you think it planning it will. Um, so for me, that was a wake up call on you're not all powerful. I think that we all get those at some point in life, whether kids like career, university, sports. At some point, it happens, and it will continue to happen. I think that you're always going to have those, but I think that that would be the failure that I would kind of like always think about the most. Because it was there was potential. It was really cool, and I think that clients that or the customers that actually loved the product really loved it. So it's always sad that like it's not something that like oh like people didn't even care. Like people actually cared and were sad that like it had to shut down after I left. But yeah, that's probably the one that I remember the most or most top of mind.
Yeah, I also reflect a lot on like not fails, but I don't know, failed experiments or failed hypotheses that I had in the past in different companies in different products. And I also like what I have in my mind that like in marketing, I don't know about other sphere, like about other things in tech, but in marketing, in growth, you work with a lot of uncertainty, like with markets, with a lot of people, with like a lot of different stuff and it's just impossible to predict everything, just to understand everything. So sometimes you just need to experiment with different stuff and try to catch, I don't know, the best version of this landing page or the best version of your, I don't know, messaging or something like that. So, yeah. And I remember like that for me, like at least a few years ago or even more, it was like super hard, super hard. Don't take it personal. Like so, like because okay, maybe I'm not the good in this field. Okay, maybe the problem isn't me. Like how don't take it personal? Like, because it's so easy to.
I think I mean, part of me always will take it somewhat personal, but I think that especially growth is a really hard piece for that because like if you do actually growth as like full time like experimentation, all these things, like success rate is actually quite low that you feel like you're always failing. And like sometimes like when you have really high successful like the past 10 experiments, like 70% have been successful. You're like, oh, like really proud of yourselves. Like, oh, like, are we really trying hard enough if we're being that successful? Like, it's also that piece. So it's hard to honestly like it's a hard piece of the role to like not take it too personally. But at the end of the day, like it's also just I think that like for me having a kid like a baby also changed a lot of my mentality there because I mean I'm still a very career driven. I love work. I'm a workaholic, which is probably not great. Um, but like before, like it was my everything pretty much. Like if I was good at my job, I was good at like everything. And like now, like I have a daughter, and like priorities shifted. Like that little human comes here, and like she wants something to do with me. I'll be like, yeah, see ya. Like you know, and like it changes the way you see success and failure, and puts a bigger picture on its work. And sometimes it's a fucking conversion rate. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And so, as I understand your advice, for example, in such situation, I just need to think how to, get a baby or get a daughter. Okay.
I also don't recommend that. Like babies are really hard. It's been really hard to live through like a pandemic with a baby. So no, but look at the bigger picture. I mean, I think that everyone kind of has to figure out that like work is not life, and different things pull you that way. For me, was my daughter.
Yeah, and that's great that like that you not found your daughter, but you I don't know get this idea that work is not everything. Yeah, I also know that it's not easy, like because when you love your job and when you're like good at it, or at least you think that you're good at it, it's just too hard to do something else because okay, I just love my work. Like, why do I need to do something else? I already have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any more questions to you, but I want to ask you, like, maybe do you have, I don't know, something advice or some thoughts in your minds, like which you want to share, or I don't know, something that you want to share with our audience, maybe about your mentorship, about something that you want to share, or just have in mind, just fire it.
Back to the basics. I think that that's kind of like my message of understand the human and the problem. And I think that that insight is what's going to help you become a better marketer. Um, it's not about the tools. It's not about how good you're a media buyer. Like if you don't understand the basics, it's going to be hard to do growth or marketing. I think, or product or anything that is related to that. So that's kind of where my brain goes into, and what I try to like keep pushing people into is like, it's the human behind it. Humans are the ones making the purchases. It's not just a number.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Thanks for this conversation. It was like a really great chat, and I also have a lot of not ideas but thoughts to think later. Not only about child and daughter that that you recommend me our listeners to have, but also about other things. So thank you a lot.
Thank you for having me. I love the chat, and yeah, hopefully we don't see a spike in babies after the episode comes out.